Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet another episode of Dienstag. I'm delighted to have a very dear friend of mine with me tonight, Jaime Olaiz, professor of constitutional theory and international law, research professor of constitutional theory and international law at Universidad Panamericana in Mexico City. To be correct, Jaime is one of the foremost experts when it comes to both subjects in Mexico and beyond. It is a privilege to have him with us tonight and to talk a bit about the current situation in Mexico. As always, the audience is invited to participate in our conversation by simply entering questions in the chat function, and I will try to pick up questions as we move along. Jaime, it is great to have you with us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation, Dean Bezemek. It's a pleasure being here with you and your excellent community of students, and very happy to join this conversation today.
So on January 19th, everybody evidently is looking to the north of Mexico when a new administration in the United States is about to be sworn in particular, when the president that is leaving office pledged to build a big, beautiful wall and make Mexicans pay for it. Tomorrow, I think, may be somewhat a game changer when it comes to U.S.-Mexican relationships, or won't it be? What is your take on that?
Well, I think you have summarized it very clearly. I think for Mexico, the new administration in the U.S. will turn a very challenging situation, because the current Mexican administration has been used to this hands-off strategy from the Trump administration, in which they only requested a very strong commitment to stop immigration from south of the Mexican border. So now I think we will meet a completely different approach with a more keen and more demanding U.S. partner in terms of human rights, security, war on drugs, and particularly right now, due to the present policies of López Obrador administration in terms of energy and foreign investment, I think we will meet very hard times with the U.S. partners as well. As you probably imagine, the U.S.-Mexico relationship historically has been very difficult, very complex. It has different areas, not only of collaboration, but also of recurrent tensions. So I think it will continue being the same with this new administration. The only difference, and it's relevant, is the attitude from the president of the United States. I think the president of the United States knows very well Mexico, knows Latin American problems as well. So he's very well informed, and he will care about the relationship. My take on from a critical standpoint on the Trump administration is not only that the U.S. president didn't care about it, except for electoral purposes and having this inflammatory speech in terms of building that wall and making Mexico paying for it, but also in terms that he didn't follow the advice of his peers and his staff in terms of the relationship with foreign countries. So I think we will meet a more professional U.S. incumbent president that will care about the relationship.
The funny thing, it seems, is that while U.S.-Mexican relationships, or the U.S.-Mexican relationship in general, went off to a rather rocky start when Donald Trump took office. The incumbent president of Mexico, López Obrador, whom you mentioned already before, seems to have grown rather fond of Donald Trump. And that, even though, of course, he would rather be considered a member of a leftist political movement, whereas Donald Trump, of course, hit hard to the right. Still, both leaders have been described in outlets such as the New York Times as in a mutual agreement when it comes to many things. Immigration on the one hand, trade also, and in particular on the other. Isn't that surprising, or is that something that came together quite naturally, even though unexpectedly?
Well, your reading is perfect. I mean, actually, López Obrador gained momentum in his last presidential campaign by criticizing Donald Trump and his anti-Mexican attitude. Once he got to office, he changed 180 degrees his attitude towards Donald Trump, finding this kind of common ground that you just described, mostly in terms of their own personalities and the origin of their movements and the way they accessed to power and to office. Both represent the champions of those disenchanted with the establishment and the way in which liberal democracies used to function in both countries. So they are seen as outsiders that were cast off from the political spectrum by power elites, and now they gained this popular support in order to access office. So their style, their personality, their background in political terms is very similar. They are seen as the underdogs that are against the establishment, and then they represent the actual feelings and the considered judgment of the people. But then, I mean, results speak of themselves, particularly in Mexico. They become a great failure and a great disappointment. So I think one of the reasons for which both got along very well is that they are great political pragmatists. So as long as they achieve their particular or purposive goals, they are fine with each other. So in terms of the agenda of López Obrador and his overhauling reforms in Mexico in different areas, he really liked not to have the interference of the U.S. government. So the condition of the U.S. government was, well, as long as you take care of the migration problem, we will have hands off the internal processes of Mexico. That is troubling because not only our economy, but in fact, the political processes and all the cross-border related issues are that close that it is very difficult for a U.S. administration to say, well, we will have hands off as long as you take care of this particular issue. That was the minimalist strategy that López Obrador tried to do, and I think it will face a great change or a great shift with the new administration of Joe Biden.
Well, some may argue that Andrés Manuel López Obrador would phrase it differently, and quite interestingly so from a point of view as of constitutional theory and international law. He was quoted regularly by being quite fond of the Trump administration because of its respect for Mexican sovereignty.
Well, yes, but here comes the kind of contradictions that always haunt López Obrador. He was always praiseful of this apparent respect to Mexican sovereignty, but at the same time, a few months ago, without any diplomatic notice to Mexico about ongoing investigations on former defense secretary, he was detained by DEA agents in LA a few months ago. Then, through very turbulent negotiations with the U.S. counterparts, at last the Mexican government got the general to be returned to Mexico, and now he was acquitted of all those alleged crimes that he was prosecuted by the New York Attorney's Office. So the point is that in his rhetoric, López Obrador praises this type of respect to our sovereignty, but at the same time, he faces this lack of collaboration and sharing intelligence and information about this kind of historic detention of a top member of our military in the U.S. for apparent collaboration with drug cartels. And at that time, his speech and his rhetoric changes and says, well, that was a very disappointing attitude from the United States. We didn't expect that from a partner, and we are asking for them to return the general. So you have this recurrent ambivalence of López Obrador, not only in the U.S.-Mexico relationships, but in all areas that he deals with.
Well, evidently, the incoming administration of the U.S. is going to change the perspective here. But maybe, as some may argue, for the better. I mean, Donald Trump, he famously referred to NAFTA as the worst deal ever negotiated or ever made. And he renegotiated NAFTA, and it was substituted by the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement in July 2020, if I'm correct, which, of course, is somewhat far from ideas that have, in particular from the Mexican side, been introduced in past administrations. Vicente Fox, for example, he had the idea and he introduced it to George W. Bush, even though with lacking success, of NAFTA Plus, remodeling North America according to the role model of the European Union and European integration. Do you think that a Biden administration under the presidency of López Obrador would be able to fruitfully pursue further integration in North America, be it as extensive in the European Union, which is, of course, highly unlikely, or be it only on a minor level? Or will things basically stay just the same because everybody is quite happy with the deal made under the Trump administration?
Well, first of all, I think the USMCA was actually only a change of name. But the terms of the agreement remained basically the same as in NAFTA. So it was more a whim from President Trump rather than a strategic approach of revising or revisiting NAFTA after 20 years plus of being in operation. So that being said, the problems that will arise in Mexico, ironically, in months with the U.S. are precisely for the lack of compliance from Mexico in the terms in which the USMCA has been drafted. So particularly due to the policies in environment and energy of the current administration, last week, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Commerce, and the Secretary of Economy of the U.S. government, in a joint letter to their counterparts in Mexico, asked the Mexican government to feel obliged to comply with the USMCA. Because right now, the policies of the Mexican government in terms of energy and environment are trying to concentrate powers and privileges in the agencies of the government, instead of allowing private foreign investors to participate in the sector. So that goes clearly against the spirit of the USMCA. Now, on your question of the possibility of further North American or Latin American integration, I don't see the present administration in Mexico championing for such a project. Actually, they are much more aligned with this anti-American spirit with countries such as Venezuela, Bolivia, Argentina included. So I don't see them pushing for more integration. On the other hand, I see the Biden administration changing completely, as you have seen with the latest news, the dramatic policies of international isolation that the Trump administration put forward. So tomorrow, one of the first executive orders that the president will issue deals with environment and the famous XL pipeline. And also, he will send a piece of legislation in terms of immigration reform, trying to dismantle the policies established by the Trump administration. So I think we will face a dramatic change in terms of those policies in the region, and that will affect directly not only the operation of the USMCA, but perhaps it will reestablish or regenerate the conversations of the plan of this plan of the free trade agreement that was proposed by President Obama of all the Latin American region. So I think that is a possibility with the U.S. administration that will find, I believe, a reluctant attitude of the Mexican government.
I mean, naively arguing, one may say that Mexico is quite probably interested, or has quite probably to be interested in deeper integration when it comes to the whole region. First of all, of course, Mexico is a major player in Latin America, and it is an essential link also, but not only geographically, to the United States. And therefore, of course, it could by itself revisit its position as an area that would allow for additional economic prosperity and political influence alike. At the same time, pardon my saying this, but López Obrador, he came to office promising 4% annual growth when it comes to the economy. The economy has done quite the opposite. In 2019, Mexico went into something that many would refer to as a recession. Wouldn't further economic integration of the region actually first and foremost benefit Mexico?
Well, from a liberal standpoint, of course, and that's what we need. And in terms of common sense, what you say is completely accurate, The point is that this administration is totally ideologized against this type of collaborations. So he goes against the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, all frameworks of international cooperation. He dealt with NAFTA because he didn't have a chance to take back all the negotiations that anticipated his presidency. But the point is that he doesn't believe in terms of free trade and liberal economy. His focus is mainly on austerity, apparently fighting on corruption, but that has also shown that it's kind of cherry-picking cases and not an actual policy of fighting corruption. And the bottom line is that his view of the state is to concentrate power in order to have resources to buy votes for the next election. That's his very primary view of political reality. Take a look on how much foreign policy he has done over the 2 years he has been in office. He only made one official visit, forced to do it, to the US last July. And his participation in international forums has been very disappointing, to put it mildly. He spoke in the recent UN General Assembly and the G20 meeting, or the summit of the G20, about the raffle of the presidential airplane in Mexico, instead of talking about real world policies and things that matter to the heads of a state and government. So his views are extremely domestic, very much anachronized and anachronic. And I think the way in which you put the goods of economic integration in Latin America for the good of Mexico that are completely plausible and persuasive are not in his mind.
Well, supporters of AMLO, as he's commonly referred to, would argue that, of course, the president, as he has himself pointed out, would rather measure economic success by the happiness of the people than by economic growth. And of course, Andrés Manuel López Obrador has traditionally been somebody who resonated very well with the people on various levels when it comes to his public appearances on the one hand, when it comes to daily talk shows, if I'm informed correctly, on the other. So isn't that something that would be plausible just the same for a president who has, as you argued, a domestic focus?
Well, yes, as long as he shows results. The point is, and as you put in your former question, he promised an economic growth of, in the third year, of around 5 to 6% annually. And now, due to the pandemic, but things were behaving very bad before the pandemic. We have a -8 or -9 prospectus for this year of economic growth. So as you phrase it, we are currently in a recession, and it seems that it will get worse. So the point is that he speaks a lot. He talks a lot daily, as you said, for 2 hours, but he doesn't deliver. That is the point. And he has used this platform of his daily press conferences to alienate the country. He is a factor of division rather than being a factor of bringing people together in Mexico, and I tell you this objectively. So the point with him is that everything is rhetoric and very poor substance. So in terms of not only economic growth, but the healthcare system for the pandemic, it's completely dismantled. Right now, the government is facing a great pressure from public opinion to clarify what is happening with the vaccines, because they changed their official version every day. So at some point they said that they had covered vaccines for half of Mexican population for June this year, and now it seems that they don't have even for 10% of the population. So they deal on a daily basis with this kind of contradictions that are very inherent to the populist politician, meaning that they lie at whim, they distort reality, and they present things as their audience or their political basis expect to hear, and they try to govern with that. And at some point, reality reaches you. The very example of that is Donald Trump. So I think in Mexico, with time, reality will overshadow all the way in which this government is factoring reality.
Well, you mentioned another interesting structural similarity when it comes to comparing the current Mexican president and Donald J. Trump. Interesting fact, I think many of our viewers may have forgotten about that, was that in 2006, López Obrador claimed widespread election fraud and had great popular support for this claim. And he went as far as holding a fake inauguration on the Zócalo for him to become sworn in, even if only theatrically, of course, as president of Mexico. So when it comes to his populist leanings structurally, some may argue this is same, even though different.
Yes, even in that time, he called himself the legitimate president of Mexico. And one of the reasons he gained the last election is because one of his strong points is that since 2006, he was he was very strategic in order to not to lose that political support that he gained in 2006. So for the last 14 years, he has been the only Mexican politician that has covered the whole political spectrum in order to win the election of 2018. So he managed to travel the country many times. He knows better than nobody the villages, the communities of Mexico, and that is his strong point. And he articulated all his narrative precisely based on the apparent fraud of 2006 and the way in which he was robbed of the presidency. If you take a look on the events of the U.S. Capitol of last January the 6th, I think it was, maybe it was coincidence, I don't know, but it was like a resemblance of what happened in Mexico, as you said, in 2006. A leader inciting violence against institutions and alleging that they were deprived of a legitimate triumph. That was the script from the 2006 Mexican presidential election. So you'll find one more point of coincidence or similarity between Trump and López Obrador.
Differing from Trump, of course, López Obrador is truly a people's president. And as you indicated before, whereas his predecessor spent his weekends on the golf course, he spends his weekend traveling around the country, visiting villages, or as long as the pandemic would allow it, even though in the early stages of the pandemic, he continued to do so, or for which he was quite severely criticized. I mean, when it comes to that, differing from somebody who would hold giant rallies rather than truly interact with the people, López Obrador always, of course, had a great amount of credibility. From the populist point of view, the interesting fact about him rather seems to be, and I would be very interested in your take from a, let's say, political theory point of view when it comes to this. He's been around for quite a long time now when it comes to the political scenery in Mexico. So he may well be considered being a member of the political establishment. Whereas in the way he's publicly perceived, that is distinctly not the case. Differing from Donald Trump, who plausibly has a claim that he came to Washington as an outsider, López Obrador never has been that much of an outsider, or at least not for quite a long time.
Correct. He's a member of the political establishment. He has been in major political decisions even before being president. He was mayor of Mexico City from 2000 to 2006. He was president of two major political parties of the left. He has been twice member of the Chamber of Deputies. So, I mean, he has been part of the political elite that he nowadays criticized on a daily basis. I think that one of the reasons for which his strategy has been that successful is that he recurrently, instead of talking of the problems of the day, he's always comparing or referring to the problems of past administrations, to the legacy of past administrations, and the way in which he frames that they deprived the people of growth and of life quality and everything related with economics due to corruption. So as long as he maintains an electoral base that is satisfied with that discourse, blaming past administrations and saying that they are trying to put together a country that was left in pieces or in ruins, he may continue, and he and his movement may continue winning elections. He won by landslide in 2018. We have intermediate elections in 2021, and that will be the test of his first half in office. I mean, due to the pandemic, due to the economic crisis, it appears that he will not replicate the same results as in 2018, but it still has a very strong political capital that I think he will use at its most for this election in order to keep control of Congress.
Well, some would argue that the strong mandate that he still has and still claims is, of course, as you indicated, due to the failures of his predecessors. Mexico's war on drugs, for example, under Calderon was, a very prominent example of a failed policy, or what many would consider a failed policy. And thereafter, of course, things didn't necessarily get better. Corruption tended to be one of the major issues when it came to government under his predecessors. And of course, López Obrador has great credibility still now when you believe popular surveys when it comes to his ability to effectively fight corruption and so on and so forth. So when it comes to his emphasis on that, doesn't he have a point?
Well, if you take it as you just phrased it, he may have it. But the point is that everything, again, is just he puts a show, but the underlying premise is completely different. I'll give you two examples. In the first months of his administration, there was an operation of our Navy forces and also with the collaboration of U.S. agents in order to detain in Culiacan, a Pacific state in Mexico, the son of the drug lord Chapo Guzman. They succeeded in detaining him, and at the same moment, Culiacan turned to be a war zone of all the thoughts of the son of the Chapo. Closed the town and said, "Well, we will spread violence here unless you release him." And López Obrador personally. And he acknowledged that in later days, he ordered the release of the Chapo's son in order to prevent a further massacre, in his own words. So that was never seen in Mexico in that dramatic fashion. So that's one example of a president abdicating of fulfilling his duty of taking this drug lord, no matter the consequences. One example. Second, after that happened, a few months later, he was recorded in again in Culiacan, in the very same state, walking towards the SUV where the mother of this drug lord, the Chapo, was to say hello to her. Never seen it before. And he has tried to intercede through diplomatic channels to assure family visits of the Chapo's family to him in New York, where he is detained. So again, Dean Bezemek, he plays with this in terms that from a formal and institutional standpoint are unacceptable. So he's always dealing with this kind of popular sentiment. He leans with Chapo because he's very much appreciated in the region. And he's seen as a champion of the people in Culiacan. So López Obrador tries to take political advantage from that.
Mm-hmm. I find your assessment very interesting, also and in particular because it mirrors what I recently came across in the British weekly The Economist. Where an article stated that Mexico needs statecraft, yet its president offers theater. AMLO shows little ability to get to grips with actual governing. That is interesting from a variety of points, but also when it comes to questions of political and constitutional theory. couldn't one argue, quite on the contrary, that he's simply getting to terms with the ability or with the possibility of parts of Mexico being actually and effectively governed at this point of time? I mean, you indicated it before. Isn't the state, at least in some parts of the country, failing to fulfill its core functions when it comes to basic security, for example?
Exactly. And the point is that if the state is failing, more than ever, you have to have an attitude of enforcement of the rule of law, instead of abdicating of doing what you're expected to do due to the pressures or the extortion of the drug cartels. What is happening now is that, as Trump did with Mexican domestic policy, López Obrador is doing exactly the same with the drug cartels. Drug cartels, due to these policies of hands-off of the government that he, in this show attitude phrased as, let's try to bring hugs instead of shooting, abrazos, no balazos, he phrased it in Spanish. Now lots of regions in Mexico are completely controlled adamantly by the drug cartels, and the government is doing nothing about it. So, and he feels fine with that, because he says that at the end, if the people likes the drug cartels in their communities, that is fine. So that is the great problem and the great predicament of his hats-off policy against the war on drugs in Mexico, that once they really established in our communities that former administrations fought very hard, they may be a point of no return.
Coming back to the issue of the rule of law that you raised, and whether or not it may actually be and effectively be observed in several parts and regions of the country, but overall under the current administration. I read a very provocative piece in the New York Review of Books the other day, and I would like to quote a passage and simply get your take on this, because I find it quite harsh from or also against the backdrop of our conversation, but perhaps my naive Austrian point of view gets the better of me here. It would read, among the elected despots of our day, once they are democratically voted into office, seek to do away with the separation of powers and judicial independence, to limit freedom of expression, and ultimately to subvert democracy itself. One is accustomed to seeing the names of Vladimir Putin, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Rodrigo Duterte, Bolsonaro, and Donald Trump, and several other names that are listed here. But the passage would continue. The list rarely includes Andrés Manuel López Obrador. The world seems not to be aware that as president of Mexico, he too is seeking to do all these things. Is that an overstatement?
No, sadly, I think it's an accurate statement. Last week, in one of his daily shows, he said that he will send Congress a piece of legislation for dismantling all independent agencies that are protected constitutionally, dealing with telecommunications, energy, and access to information and data protection. He thinks they duplicate the functions of the government, and therefore there is no need to have them. The reason for this extra branches of government, of these regulatory agencies, are precisely because they were designed, as you know, to be isolated from the political motivations or the political process, and therefore have a more professional, more expert approach on the regulation that they have at hand. Well, López Obrador has been a critic of those independent agencies for many years, and he wants to take them out. He also wants to interfere in the way in which the central bank performs its function. So everything that I'm saying is protected at the constitutional level, and he relies on his majority in Congress to push these constitutional amendments in order to concentrate power in the executive branch. The record shows for the last 2 years that his presidency has been a one-man show presidency. He actually does not rely on the expertise, if there is any, of his cabinet members. Rather, he imposes decisions. Publicly, he undermines the authority of his secretaries. So the point is that he doesn't have this professional approach toward public service. We rather have not only a showman, but a very motivated politician in office that only deals, and his mindset is exclusively focused on the next election, and that's the point. So I think the quote, sadly, is not an overstatement. Rather, it shows how things are facing a turning point in Mexico in terms of separation of powers and democracy. He, for example, one of the greatest achievements of Mexican political liberalization of the last 30 years was to have or to achieve an electoral independent authority. Now he wants also to dismantle that agency for the government to organize elections. So that is taking us back to the 80 years in power of the PRI, which actually was the political party in which López Obrador initiated his political career. And he's very much inspired for his view in the Gilded Age of the populism of the 70s in Mexico.
Well, but of course, the law and the lawyers in Mexico serving as, of course, the backbone also of the rule of law mustn't necessarily helplessly observe these things unraveling. I had one of my, or the first Dienstag actually, with Frederick Schauer, and he made a strong point when it came to the claims, or Trump's claims of election fraud, that the courts stepped in at the moment when push came to shove. What about talking about independent actors that is independent from the executive in Mexico? What about the judiciary? What about the Supreme Court that traditionally has had great influence when it came to upholding the rule of law? Is the judiciary not in a position to step in when it comes to all these things that you describe here?
Well, wonderful question. The legal community is concerned, of course, but since in Mexico there is no such thing as a mandatory bar in order to practice, the profession in Mexico is not well organized. So as fragmented as it is, it doesn't have a strong voice or enough loud voice, louder enough to influence the process. So the underlying the underlying barrier would be the judiciary, and sadly, the answer is that they are caught between accommodation and subordination. The current president or the Chief Justice of the Mexican Supreme Court has shown that he's very close to President López Obrador. He has embraced most of his policies, and he has, in order to prevent further intervention of Congress or the executive branch in the reorganization of the judiciary, he decided to accommodate himself politically or align himself with the president in order to strategically pass a piece of legislation reforming the judiciary to prevent further interventions. That reform has been exclusively in terms of organization, austerity, gender policies, and not a substantial reform. And all the cases that have been challenged by the opposition in court against the president, most of them have been or put in a docket or ruled in favor of the government. So a recent case which was dramatic was an unconstitutional proposal for referendum that the president put forward for this election in 2021. The project or the draft for the decision was declaring the unconstitutionality of the proposal for referendum. And in a dramatic shift, the very day of when the decision is issued, a majority led by the Chief Justice decided to grant constitutionality to the proposal for referendum of the president, even though it went against the Constitution in very explicit terms. So that's when we saw a clear subordination of the current Chief Justice and some of his peers to the present government. So I don't know how the prospects will look in the future in terms of further challenges to legislation of this government, Christoph.
Well, cynically speaking, one may say, well, the Constitution is what the judges say it is, as we all know. However, evidently, academics like you seem to be critical from when it comes to assessing the position the judiciary seems to take towards what many consider an overreach of the executive. What about the state of academia? I mean, Mexico has traditionally a very outspoken, bold academic scene. Do they engage in public discourse also, and in particular when it comes to legal discussions, assessing the legality of the government's actions?
Yes, very much and very actively. And the answer from the government has been to cut all funds for academic research in Mexico through what we called our national system of researchers. So they have been trying to, let's say, control this academic criticism by reducing the budget for financing academic projects, or for this type of public centers of public research are also being deprived of their public funding. So because López Obrador, as he phrases it, he says those are members of the elite, those are members of the establishment, and therefore they are part of the same power mafia that we are trying to eradicate and to fight against. So academia keeps loyal to its commitment to signal and to in many ways debate what is happening, but his administration is clearly trying to undermine not only its independence, but also its criticism.
So, I mean, if you were to make an educated guess, how will this all play out in the end? And is the law, are the mechanisms provided on various legal levels, but also in particular when it comes to constitutional law, of any help overcoming the situation as you describe it?
Well, I think one phrase of López Obrador that not only answers your question, but summarizes his attitude towards the Constitution and the rule of law is that he recurrently says that if the people have to choose between following the Constitution and following justice, do not hesitate and always follow the latter, follow justice. From his view, the Constitution is the creation of a power elite and therefore does not represent accurately and legitimately the considered judgment of the people. And he says that the great problem of the rule of law and the Constitution is that it is managed by lawyers and they are by nature deceptive. And therefore, the people have to overcome that situation, but following justice. So that's why, that's how he justifies his continuous challenges against the Constitution. You originally said that the Constitution is what judges say, and I would agree with that, except when judges go against the Constitution. In Mexico, at least, they are not allowed to go beyond what the Constitution establishes because they are guardians of it. So in that view, the way in which López Obrador is seeing things and seeing reality is that the Constitution is an obstacle for bringing justice to those have-nots that he represents and that have been isolated from the political process historically. So that view from, let's say, a scholar or a common citizen may imply not major harm. But if that attitude and that vision comes from the head of a state who when he's sworn in, he promises to protect the Constitution, we have a problem exactly as the great paradox of last January the 6th, inciting a riot against the Congress. I mean, we have this incumbents that in order to gain popularity, they go against the very core of the institutions they represent and the Constitution itself.
Well, one of the many disappointing things that I had to learn from you, one of the most disappointing maybe to learn that your president may not be a good Kelsenian also. However, from the point of your point of view of your theoretical position, which famously, of course, is the New Haven School, that may make him an even more effective leader. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, because I mean the way in which he manages power, he maximizes the not only his quota of power, but also his political basis. So in terms of raw power as established by the New Haven School, I would agree with your assessment, except for the thing that among the other values of the New Haven School that, as you probably remember, it strives to a comprehensive enhancement of all values and not only one or a few of them. There are other values that are not in his agenda and at the end may cause a detriment of the whole picture, such as wealth, enlightenment, rectitude, respect, well-being, because his focus is solely on power. So I think in the short term, he is actually maximizing all his prospects, but at the end, he will have to face the lack of a comprehensive enhancement of all the values postulated by the New Haven School from that perspective.
On a completely different note, allow me for one last question. Yesterday, some restaurants, at least in Mexico City, reopened. Have you already been?
No, I haven't. Since March, I have been in quarantine.
Well, that wouldn't add necessarily to the mood. I do hope sincerely that you will be able to end your quarantine soon. And I would sincerely also would like to thank you for your time and for this wonderful discussion from which we all benefited a lot and learned a lot, even though what we learned didn't always and necessarily please us.
Thank you for having me, Dean Bezemek. It has been a great pleasure. And I love this conversation. And I hope we will meet again very soon.
That is my hope, just the same. I also do hope, ladies and gentlemen, in the audience, that we will meet again next week when we will have the final Dienstag of this term, a bit earlier than usual, at 2 in the afternoon CET, because we're talking with a dear friend and colleague of mine in Japan, Akiko Ejima from Meiji University in Tokyo, and she will kindly analyze the current situation in Japan. For now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us tonight. Have a good evening and hope to see you next time around. Thank you so much.